Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Platform Engineering Show. I'm your co-host, Alan Shimel from TechStrong. And let me introduce you to my co-host here on the show, Luca Galante. Luca is with the platformengineering.org community. First of all, hey, Luca, welcome. It looks like from the blurred background, you're home in Milan still.
I'm back in the van. I'm in Madrid now.
Back in Madrid. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, you are the globetrotter, dude. Good for you. So what happened? Last time we checked in on you, you were in Milan. Did you go right from Milan to Madrid, or what's been going on in your world?
Landed this morning.
You just got
taking
in.
the van. Yeah. And I'm taking the van back to Milan. So that's why I'm here mostly. I was going to go to Barcelona. We have some workshops that we're doing, some platform engineering workshops that we're doing on Friday in Barcelona. And I was going to fly there and back to Milan. But then I was like, well, actually, anyway, logistics, but we wanted to bring the van over to Italy. So I was like, okay, let me just land a day earlier, drive to Barcelona, and then drive from Barcelona after the workshop to Milan, which is going to be a long ride. But hey, it's friends in between. So it's going to be nice places to stop by.
Good for you, man. That sounds like a nice road trip. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Luca, so for this episode of the Platform Engineering Show, we're talking about steps to platform engineering hell. And we should say that this really comes out of an article that's up on platformengineering.org, right?
Correct.
And the article is actually
in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put the notes in. The article is actually 9 steps. I don't know if we'll go through all 9 steps, but we're going to have steps to platform engineering hell. But, it's kind of a funny premise, right? Because we're here trying to say platform engineering is a good thing. It's a way out. It's a way to scale it.
Yeah. Right.
Where does it all go wrong here that it could become a hell?
Yeah. So this stems out of this 9 steps of platform engineering article, which actually stems from another article, which was I don't know how many steps to DevOps hell that I had written prior to that. And then it was interesting just to see, because to your point, right? Like everybody was like, oh, great. I just moved from DevOps to platform engineering. All my problems are solved. And then, obviously you start seeing this anti-patterns emerge within the platform engineering practice too, where, well, actually, if you don't do it right, you end up, potentially even in a worse place than where you started. And so I think if we start from the top, the first thing that I see a lot of teams making as a mistake is, okay, let me take, the sort of hodgepodge of DevOps, CloudOps, SRE, infrastructure teams, and just rebrand them to platform team. And it's actually interesting, we started hosting these trainings for organizations to go through from, to kind of upskill their team. And one of the things that I see resonates the most with platform leaders is this, right? They say, every time I say this, everybody nods. They're like, oh my God, yes, so true. It's just I inherited this legacy of different teams. Now they all sit under me. They're all part of the platform engineering org. But actually nobody has a clue as to what platform engineering even is, right? And so I think the first mistake down this sort of slippery slope of the down platform engineering hell is this idea of okay, well, let me just rebrand whatever I have in house right now with no upskilling, no retraining, and just hope for the best, right? And that just doesn't work, right? Because you have people that fundamentally approach infrastructure, the way the relationship between developers and infrastructure as well, in a very different way than technically what a platform engineer should do. And so without retraining, without shifting that mindset, it becomes very, very problematic. And that leads right into the second step, which is this product mindset, right? That we've talked about before. We had a full episode on platform as a product as one of kind of the core principles of platform engineering. And that's really, also what's missing a lot of times, because there's no retraining. Building a platform just gets treated as this kind of one and done sort of infrastructure project that's 6 months or whatever. I'm going to teach developers something new. I'm going to implement something new, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. And of course, that's also a recipe for disaster because, like we said before, previous episodes, really the point of building a platform is that it's an internal product, and it has internal customers, the application developers, or other users as well, security teams, architects, even the infrastructure teams themselves can be users of the platform. So the point is, you have to ship it as a product, implement product best practices, and really think of it as a product, not just from a technical perspective, but also from a business and go-to-market perspective, where your internal market is your, internal TAM, the total addressable market, is essentially the size of your engineering organization. And so that mindset shift towards platform as a product is essential, is part of the retraining, of course. It can also help, obviously, having a product person or multiple product people within the platform engineering organization that lead this transformation. It helps if executives understand this and support this change. But at the end of the day, that is another thing where if it doesn't happen, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So maybe we can start from there, and then we can kind of like dive into other steps too. But I think that's really where we see in the community the first kind of roadblock, and where the trainings and the courses that we've done resonate so much with the market, because everybody understands this idea of like, okay, platform engineering can solve all these problems. Let me go do it. But then if you don't do it right, if you don't upskill your people, it's very easy to get stuck very, very quickly.
Yeah. I think one of the things about that too, Luca, is something you said right off the bat, which is for a lot of organizations, moving to a platform engineering model, we could call it that, right?
Yeah.
Is almost like a lot of recycling instead of creating new, right? And granted that there's nothing the matter with that per se, right? You do want to
Sure
reuse these assets, and you do want to make it all work, tightly. But you can't just put a fresh coat of paint and change the sign above the door and say, voila, platform engineering. It takes more than just a fresh coat of paint and a new name on the door. And I think, I'm guessing, right? You guys have the course. I don't. I haven't taken the course. But I would imagine it has to start off with, preparation is the key to this, right? Having a plan of instituting this platform engineering model across the organization, and working with DevOps and SRE and ops and security and all, right? Everybody's got to get buy-in. Everybody's got to understand what it is. Everyone has to understand what they've got to do differently, or what they've got to upskill on, or how this all fits in. Like anything else, right? Fools rush in where wise men dare to tread, right? You've got to, it's all in the prep, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a few things that you said that I think are worth unpacking. One is this like fresh thing of paint, right? Which is so true. Like this is another huge, I think, challenge that emerges when people are just like, okay, I have a platform engineering band-aid because, my execs read on Gartner that is cool and they should invest in it. And so now I need to go do it, and I need to show something for it, right? And so the first thing they do is they focus on, repainting the facade, really, right? So it's like, hey, let's put like some UI, some portals, something, right, on top of the entire setup, and call it a day, right? And it's like, we've done platform engineering. And of course, the problem with that is that actually, I do think that visualization is an essential component of platform engineering, but it needs to come with a layer of automation and standardization underneath it. Otherwise, what you end up being is you actually get the sort of like the second step of buy-in by executives because they're like, oh yeah, this looks great, right? It looks like we've made a lot of progress and so on, but then actually there's no substance underneath, and then you end up quickly in a place where you're sort of essentially misusing tooling that is meant to be front end tooling to build the entire platform, and you can like shoehorn your sort of like business logic into this front end modules and so on, and you end up creating massive tech debt down the line, and that's one of the it's already one of the, I would say, another huge kind of like mistake and kind of like step to hell is this idea of like, okay, start from the front end first, but also and so really not following architectural best practice, right? Like, I think it's very important to understand that building a platform is just like building any other application. Again, it's just an internal product. You need to start from the back end and then figure out, okay, what pretty facade, what door do I add to my door, to my house, right? You don't want to start, as we said before, from like the house and the window, from so like the doors and the windows, and then kind of like add, the walls and the foundation after, right? So I think that's like a very, very important thing to avoid. And then to your point, right? It's about planning. So this is where I think one of the most significant standards that have emerged in the community in the last couple of years have been this reference architectures for enterprise grade platforms. Why? I mean, I don't know if if you remember like 2-3 years ago when people started talking a lot about platform engineering, like in places like KubeCon and so on. I remember, 3-4 years ago, I had to explain to virtually everybody I met, okay, what is platform engineering? What do we mean by this? What do we mean by that? And then, a couple of years ago, there was this clear inflection point where you could, first of all, everybody was talking about it and everybody was interested, but then also you could finally have a real conversation about it because there was this visualization, which again, it's why I think it's so important to visualize things. There was this visualization of what a platform target architecture can look like, right? And all of a sudden people had a common ground to have that conversation and to think about, back end, front end. Okay, what do we mean by this? How do these security tools interact with our platform? How do observability tools interact with our platform and everything else, right? However, I also think it's important to mention that, so, like the lack of a plan is certainly another step to hell, right? But then I think there is a subtle step right after that, which is, okay, I have this beautiful target architecture that I want to build against. Great, let's go build it. And then the mistake that people make is, okay, let me try and do everything all at once, right? And build this like amazing platform layer that is super secure, that has all observability built in, that is making everyone happy, right? And that's I think one of the big problems here is because platform engineering initiatives touch so many different stakeholders, it's very easy to fall into the trap of trying to please everybody. And that is a sure recipe for failure, in my opinion, because I think the way we should approach it is, we've talked before about this idea of minimum viable platforms, really taking, again, this like product management best practices of starting small and iterate from there. But what starting small means is both from a technical estate perspective, right? So selecting 1, maximum 2 representative applications and their respective dependencies and start from there. But then also start with like one team and especially one set of stakeholders, right? If you're trying to, make the application developers, the infrastructure people, the security people, the architects, the executives, try to make everyone happy at the same time, it's very, very, very hard to keep momentum and traction for your platform initiative. Whereas I think, I don't know if we've spoken about this before. I know you and I have offline, but we've I think it was actually part of the Predict 2025 predictions, right? This idea of the Pareto efficiency, right? Which is similar to the 80-20, the Pareto principle. But there is a subtle difference, which is interesting, I think, which is essentially is in layman's terms, like, don't piss anyone off, right? So which is like, okay, you need to make life better for some people, right? And in the case of developers, that's restart the conversation. The DevOps hell is easy, right? Like right now they're waiting for like 2 weeks to get a database provision by their ops colleagues. Like, to make that 10x better, it's easy. You just cut it into minutes. It's like self-service. So that is a 10x. But then it's important that doesn't come at the expense of, getting your security folks mad because now you're making things less secure, or, whoever else, right? Like infrastructure people now are mad because, you didn't build your platform right. So it actually now self-service means developers can just like click a button 100 times and create 100 different resources that then, infrastructure people need to deal with. So like, those are the type of things where it's like, make sure that your platform really makes life easy for somebody, but doesn't, is at worst a net neutral for everyone else, at best a net positive, but it's never a net negative, because the moment, even if it's like a 10x better for few people, for few stakeholder groups, but even just like a minus 10% for somebody else, you can bet that somebody else is gonna, like put up a crazy fight to stop this thing. And it's a strategy of the commons, right? That this like large enterprise or transformation run into, because, it is better for the organization anyway, but that person doesn't care, because that person is now 10% worse off. And you bet they're going to fight, they're going to give up their life to block this platform initiative. And that's kind of just the reality that we live in, right? You're dealing with humans. And so just to kind of like put a bow on that, I think that's the last thing I would say is, another huge mistake is just like looking at this as a technical problem to solve, which is very natural for engineers, as opposed to this like multi-stakeholder complex cultural problem, which is really a human problem that we've talked about many, many times. And that's the sure way to failure, in my opinion.
I mean, look, I'm sitting here laughing. No, but I'm sitting here laughing because, we were talking before the show today about the Google migration going on here with Tech Strong and Futurum. And that's kind of where I'm at, right? It's more than a minus 10% for me. It really kind of
yeah, sounded
rips
like
at me. Yeah, but I don't care how good it is. It's just not, I'm going to not accept it so quickly, and they've got to make it right. But I think that's a good lesson. And quite frankly, there's a DevOps lesson too. It's not just about the technology. It's not just about the technology. Right. It never is. First and foremost is people, culture, right? Because you can, it's a lot, it's pushing rope uphill to get people to accept technology or a process that they don't buy into. If they don't buy into it, this is 30 plus years in business, right? 35 years in business. I've run into this not just in IT, but in general. If your team doesn't buy into what you're selling, right? What you want them to do, it's pushing rope uphill. You don't want it. It's shoveling sand against the tide. You're just not going to win, right? You got to win them over.
Who is pushing back on DevOps, right? Because to your point, it's a similar, it's like a cultural change, right? And, I feel like looking back, it feels like everybody was agreeing, but I'm sure not everybody was agreeing, right?
So up here, everyone was agreeing, sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya, right? But the fact of the matter is it's the same people, and I'm not dissing anyone, but a lot of engineers and folks say, that culture stuff is all fine and dandy. What CI/CD tool am I using here? Are we going to GitOps from Jenkins? So, Jenkins. And what's my plugin and what's that? And that's what it's about. It's about moving, shifting security left. I don't care, but we're the testers. We don't need no testers. I'm using this new testing product, right?
Yeah.
That's automated. And so like they give their mouth moves when they talk about people and culture. But at the end of the
They
day,
don't mean it. Yeah.
it was about the tools, all about the tools. And
Yeah.
and it can't just be all about the tools. I mean, I'm sorry, but tools are important, don't get me wrong, but I don't even know if they're the most important. Right? I still think people is where it's at. But so Luca, let's assume we get off to a good start. We do the right things from the start. And we're up and moving, right? We're progressing down this platform engineering on the road to heaven, stairway to heaven. What could go wrong that makes the U-turn, after after the train left the station, right? What else? Where else can we go wrong here?
Yeah, well, I think it's the same things, it's just like a later stage, right? So I do think that getting off the ground is the hardest thing. And what's also interesting is, I think it's important to understand like platform engineering is mostly a enterprise thing, right? Or at least like mid-size sort of like engineer organization and up, right? Because that's where the problems that platform engineering solves are most badly felt. And so, and so it's important to, I think, mention, like, you basically in these situations, in these companies, you never start greenfield. Like, there's always an existing legacy, brownfield, complex enterprise thing that you need to deal with. And so it's not like you're kind of starting this platform engineering initiative in a vacuum anyway, right? So even if you're starting new, you need to start wherever you are. And then if you already are on track, it's actually, because I'm seeing it where I go in and I do these trainings with like large enterprises, and some of them are really at the early stages of their platform journey. Some already have like a platform team of like 200-300 people. And granted, some of them are just rebranded, right? And they need training. But some of these people are proper platform engineers that have been building platforms for years. Like, they know what they're doing. But the challenges are very similar, which is like, how do I get adoption? How do I get buy-in from different, stakeholders, whether it's executives or others? And so you're just at different stages of it, right? Which is why, like, the way I think of platform engineering initiatives is, you have this like MVP phase if you're at the very beginning. Then you have this kind of like production readiness, right? When you want to go from like, okay, you've proven the proof of concept all the way to, okay, let's go to production with the first set of applications and the first one or two teams. And then once you're there, you go from production readiness to all the way to full scale adoption. I was just like, okay, we're going to go to the entire organization. And every step of the way across that journey, you have, basically just like a permutation of the same set of challenges, right? Which is like, how do I convince people? Right. And maybe like the first time is like, well, how do I convince the first team? And the first team is like, you probably want to start with like a, pioneering team, how we call it in the community, that is like, the team that are like more comfortable with like new technologies, new setups, maybe the first one that implemented Kubernetes and containers back in the days, or infrastructure as code and Terraform and stuff like that, right? The one that you use to, effectively like stress test new paradigms. But so the set of challenges that you need to solve for them is radically different than the set of challenges that you need to solve for the nth team, which is, the laggards effectively within your market, within your organization. And they're not, so with the firm, or maybe you need to figure out, okay, what is the right way of, obstructing this underlying complexity while still giving them control? Because obviously they're the people that like control. They're the people that like, their infrastructure, to like being able to get their hands dirty. They like their Helm charts, whatever. And then the latter, the last group, that can just be like, well, we don't care. We're very happy to click around, but it's like, it needs to meet us exactly where we're at because we're super lazy. And I don't want to, jump into another interface or anything else, right? Which anyway is best practice. Like, you should always meet developers where they're at and users in general. But, so, and it's the same thing for executives. It's a very different thing that, at the beginning you're asking for, like $500,000, $2 million, whatever, depending on the size of your org. when then you're asking for like, 30 million because you're scaling this up. Now you're no longer 10 people platform team. You're like 100 people platform team, right? So, and so it's like, how do I keep realigning my platform engineering initiative to their priorities as their priorities change as well, right? Because it might be that last year their priority was employee retention. This year is, I need to cut my bottom line or increase my bottom line, right? Like whatever, right? So it's like, and again, and it's always this like constant cultural play of like, as the organization evolves as this like complex organism, how, does the platform evolve with it as it grows within it?
Luca, let's step back for a second though, right? I was reading an article the other day, and it was like a crazy number, like 70% of IT initiatives are not successful. They don't necessarily fail and maybe end up in hell, right? But they're not, if this is the bar for success, they don't make the bar, right? Hell maybe is down here. Is there a similar thing in platform engineering adoption curves where maybe we don't quite get to hell, but maybe we're in purgatory, right? For a time where, we didn't get to heaven per se, and we're not in hell, but we're somewhere in between.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think that's I think that's the natural state of most things in the enterprise is this kind of like stuck in the middle, right? Of like, because it's just so hard. It's, you have, at the beginning, it's easy because maybe it's easy, right? Because you have this like set of pioneers that are like driving change. They're really passionate about it, right? And then it's like, okay, and you see, that's why I think it's very, very important to think about it through the lens of a product, because you see the same thing with any product that goes into any market, right? Where it's like, okay, it requires, it's a different thing to get your first million revenue than, your first 100 million of revenue, and then your billion of revenue after that. And it's like, how do you evolve across all those things? And so, and it's so easy for, and so how many unicorns do you get? Very few, right? And the reality is that most people, end up on some like tens of millions of revenue, and that's kind of like where everybody's happy, right? And so I think that's also the thing is like, you also need to keep have an intrinsic and extrinsic motivation to keep driving this forward, where, maybe the head of platform who's so passionate about your platform engineering initiative is content now with having onboarded like your first like 10, 20% of estate, 20% of teams, out of like 10,000 developers. That's already like a huge success, and kind of like happy days. And they moved on to the new, better paid role or the next company. And so like it, and then there's no driving force. So I think this stuff is normal, happens all the time. And this is also why I think, at the end of the day, the more successful platform engineering initiatives that I see are prioritized across the, throughout the sort of chain of command, all the way, especially to the executives. Because, when it is like, it's something that really, yes, you need to consider developer adoption. Yes, you need to consider like all the different user preferences. But at the end of the day, I can tell you and this is where I think it also becomes not just like a interesting cultural conversation within the organization, but especially like also across like actual cultures like we traditionally define them, right? So like across different countries and different regions in the world and so on, where, I think we said this before, but there are clearly like platform initiatives and, more top-down cultures are more successful, because they're just top-down imposed and that's it. That's what we do it, period. Like there's no conversation. It's not a discussion. It's just what we do because we're a regulated bank, and the developer doesn't have much of a say, right? Now I'm not saying that that's the ideal state, because every organization is sort of different, although not as different as they think they are. Everybody thinks they're like a special snowflake. But at the end of the day, having that, if you can have that top-down thing, that's where I think you can really drive and sort of like, hit escape velocity and kind of like get to the entire company. Otherwise, it's just you're going to be relying on how good that particular leader is within the organization, and how motivated they stay throughout the hassle of it, right? And then it's just like a founder. Like, is a founder happy with like a 10 million valuation or 100 million valuation, or are they one that kind of like shoots for the stars, right? So it's a little bit of that. And I think even more complex because, you just add an entire politics layer within these organizations that I think you don't have actually. If you think about like, I mean, you've done a lot of startups. I'm doing my first one, but it's like you actually have a cleaner discovery mechanism with the market, because I'm selling something. If they like it, great. If they don't like it, I need to change, right? Like, whereas within an organization, when you're building an internal product, the feedback is not that direct, is not that instant, and you have all this sort of like derailing. CIO says like, actually, we need to do AI now, right? So like, that's actually what happens, and so like, I think it's even easier to get lost in all of this and just go like, look, we're 30-40% of the way there.
You don't get clear signal, right? When you're selling to consumer or even a B2B, as a start of your small organization, customers tell you yes, no, maybe, I don't like this, I like that. When you're going internally, there's the politics and there's just no clear signal. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But it's an important thing that you mentioned here, and I've seen this over and over in enterprises through my career. Call it the orphaned project or the orphaned, movement, where
right.
a charismatic guy or gal high up the food chain, this is their baby, they're going to push it through, and then either they lose their mojo, right? They don't have that kind of juice to put it through, or they leave the company, or something else happens, and now all of a sudden, without that top-down push, all the naysayers come out, all the people who said, I never liked that. I never wanted to do it. They made me do it. I'm not on it. I'm not on board. You get that a lot. And, this was an interesting thing, again, paralleling the DevOps journey. This was a huge discussion in DevOps is, can you do bottom-up DevOps? Can the developers and ops people say, hey, this works for us, right?
Yeah.
And the long and short of it was, you can get some bottom up, but you always need air cover.
Right.
If you're just going to do one little team over here, off on the side, you don't need necessarily an exec buy-in. But if you're going to do it at an enterprise scale, try to do it organization-wide without air cover. I have a good friend, Gary Groover. He used to run software for HP Printer Division, and then for Macy's, the retail company. And he's written a few books on this, right? On why you need top-down air cover.
Yes.
You need executive sponsorship for anything like this. I mean, it's just
and all the way through, right? It's like it's like a lot of people, like when they talk about, if you zoom out politics to the micro level, right? Where it's like, China has this like multi 5-year plans, right? And like, we're stuck, and it's a little bit like that, where it's like, yes, like capitalism is a great discovery mechanism, right? But then then you have this like mutations of it where it's like crony capitalism and all these things, right? Where it's like politics, it gets meddled with politics, and then it actually becomes a less good discovery mechanism or, progression engine actually, than if somebody just says what we do, right? So it's, I think about this a lot because it's very interesting. And at the end of the day, organizations are not democracies either. Like they're not meant to be, right? There's like somebody that just decides, and then they just like and that's how it works. This is why when you have like nimble teams, it works. There's somebody that just takes a call. It's what it is, period. And it might be right, it might be wrong, but at least you're moving, right? And then as you grow, you lose all of that, right?
Yeah. you know what they say, democracy is the best of the worst form of
Right.
government because it's so inefficient like that.
Yeah.
And there is times when, a more structured kind of, this is what we're going to do path
The
does
Navy.
work.
There's no
Yeah,
democracy in the Navy. Yeah.
there is none. Anyway, hey Luca, we're about out of time, man. I want to
Yeah.
thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We have the URL for this article. You can go check it out. We'll be back on with some more people. We're working here on the platform. We're very excited, and you're headed in the van on the way. Well, you're going to Barcelona, then Milan, with a lot of
Yes.
stops in the way.
Yes.
We'll catch you on the road for the next episode.
Will do. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, man. Thank you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. This is the Platform Engineering Show. Do check it out on your favorite platform. Platform, not platform. Your favorite podcast platform. Apple, Spotify, whatever. You can get it on TechStrong TV or any number of places online. Until next time, though, this is Alan Shimel and Luca Galante for Platform Engineering Show. We're out.